Welcome to Feminist Founders, the community for entrepreneurs who are ready to reject toxic capitalism and do business differently and better. We're your hosts, Becky Mollenkamp and Faith Clark, and we're so excited you're here. If you'd like to support our work, please consider a paid membership. Information is in the show notes. But without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Hi, Nikki.
Hi, Becky.
Thanks for chatting with me for part of this summer series that we're doing on Feminist Founders about invisible labor and the weight that women carry. Appreciate you being here. And I'm hoping you can start by telling us what a death doula is, because you are a death doula.
I am a death doula. Oh, what a big loaded question.
I thought it was an easy one to start.
No, I have like a 30-second answer and I have an hour-long answer. So
let's do the 30-second only because we don't have an hour.
We'll do the 30-second answer. Most succinct way, death doulas provide non-medical support for the dying their loved ones to just kind of help them navigate end-of-life spaces. So that can look like a million different things.
Right. For the dying and those that are doing caretaking and or just love them.
Yeah.
And so you deal a lot with grief. Your podcast is called Good Grief with Nikki the Death Doula. I also was hoping you could give us a definition of how do you define grief? Because I want to talk a lot about grief in this episode. And I think people often think of it only around death, but grief, I think, is much bigger than that. So could you just tell me how you define grief?
Yeah. And you're right. It's everybody's like grief equals death, right? And that's not always the case. Grief is our emotional response. And that doesn't have to be positive or negative, just our emotional response to a loss. So whatever that loss is, be it a death, be it a job, relationship, identity, like there's a million. If you had something in your life and it's no longer in your life or no longer a part of your life for whatever reason, that is a loss. And we grieve those things.
Yeah. My mom once told me too, a way that she framed it that helped me was that grief was just our reaction to when things aren't how we thought they would be.
Yeah.
So
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, because it does a loss. I mean, it's a loss of how you thought it would be, right? But so anyway, I thought that was really helpful because it's like, that could be so many things. And in fact, it can be things you even wanted, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it still changes how you knew things to be. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it can look like a breakup that you wanted, but it's still, there's grief inside of that because you thought it was going to be something that would last a while, or a job you wanted to leave, but once you leave, you can't I think people often are like, I don't understand why I'm upset. I didn't want this job, but there's still grief, even with changes that you want, right?
Sure. And you brought up the example of like a breakup. That's a good one because so many people with divorce, even the person who may have initiated the divorce, they of course they grieve the loss of that marriage because there was a future that they had been anticipating and planning for, and that future is no longer there. So they're grieving the loss of that future that they thought they were going to have at some point.
And I know your death doula work is around death specifically, but your podcast talks about grief in, I think, this bigger way, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking at grief from all sorts of angles.
Yeah.
And where I'm kind of hoping to start, because this is what this whole episode is about, is when you think about grief and big G grief, all the ways that we experience it. What have you noticed? This is going to be a big question, so be prepared. But what have you noticed about the ways that women carry that weight? And perhaps if you've had an opportunity, how that weight might look different in the way that men are carrying the weight of grief. But we can just talk, we don't have to compare it necessarily, but I am curious, like, especially when we talk about like invisible labor, these invisible ways that women are carrying grief.
Yeah. Well, and man, there's so much to this, and that is such a loaded question. No, it's fine. I love
this. Path, and we'll go there.
Yeah. So there's so much to say about that because women carry so much unrecognized grief, right? And we can just talk about the things like the death losses, the non-death losses, the whatever. But if you think about the way most women, we don't have to compare, but women are a little more open to at least discussing grief or facing it or talking about it, whereas men not always, but typically are not.
Again, that's about our conditioning often, and that we are conditioned that it's okay for us to talk about feelings, and men are conditioned not to.
Right. But that said, we still don't always do that. That's even just a societal and cultural thing, not necessarily a gender thing.
Especially around grief, right? It's a thing that we often try to hide.
Yep. But
because we don't want to make others uncomfortable.
Right. And that's just it, because when we express our grief, people around us do get uncomfortable. And then they say stupid things or things they don't necessarily mean to be hurtful, but can be hurtful. But as far as like women specifically, like there's a lot of griefs that we don't even talk about with each other. And I'm learning a lot recently about miscarriage loss. I've never experienced a miscarriage of my own personally, but I know so many women who have, and that's one of those things that we're just taught to get over that. Just buck up and move on, like, and how many cruel things women have been told about, like, well, you can have more kids, or, maybe it just wasn't meant to be. Like, that was a life that they were, whether they were anticipating or not, was a life that was now part of them and is now gone. So, and those are things we just put so much shame on grief that we're afraid to even think about feeling it.
Right. Well, women are told not to share pregnancy news until after the risk of miscarriage goes dramatically down in the second trimester. So what we're setting women up to do is to carry that shame or that grief, not shame. It shouldn't be shameful, although that often happens with it, but to carry that grief alone.
Yeah.
We're conditioning people right
Yeah.
away saying, no, don't tell anybody because you might lose
Right.
this pregnancy. And then what? And then people would have to know that
Right.
you're grieving, right? So we are setting up, and I've been through that. I have had a miscarriage at 10 weeks, and we had just told everyone literally 2 days before. And there was that weight of that.
Yeah.
But I now look back and think this idea that people aren't supposed to be sharing the news because they might upset others with their grief, it's awful. And so, yeah, that's a beautiful example. Well, a sad example, but a real
Yeah.
example of this weight that we put onto. And I say women because yes, there's often a man involved, and often maybe they're also excited and they're shouldering some of that weight as
Sure.
well and
Sure.
helping their partner through it. But I mean, it is largely put onto women as
Mhm.
they are the primary physical experience, having the primary physical experience in that case
Right.
of the loss. So anyway, yeah, that's a great example where we're being taught
Mhm.
your grief needs to be done alone.
Right. We're also taught our whole lives to be the one to shoulder others' griefs, right? Our male counterparts are for even like our children, like, oh gosh, we need to take all their feel. We take on everybody else's grief. I mean, I could go on and on about generational trauma. We have to hold on to that too. So we're holding everybody's grief because when, like, let's say a friend loses a spouse, it's always the women of the community that are going to that person to give them the support. That, not, I hate saying always. That's a bad choice of words,
Let's use that.
but it's often the women that are going there to make sure that they've got their meals, make sure they're being taken care of, make sure their self care is, make sure they're getting out of bed. It's the women that are most of the time doing these things.
And what does that then do? Because so the miscarriage example is a great example of the ways that we are conditioned to take the burden of grief on to ourselves, to not
Mhm.
seek out community support and help when we're in grief. But
Mhm.
also, like you said, there's this added layer of caregiving that we
Mhm.
are conditioned into, that
Yeah.
it's our role to take care of others, to take on their emotional pain.
Mhm.
I can speak it from experience. My husband's father just died very recently. It's not even
Yeah.
been a month yet. And through that experience, my primary concern was my husband and my son. I have my own grief, obviously, but it is clearly a bigger loss for my husband, it's his own
Mhm.
father, and for my
Sure.
son because it's his grandfather and
Yeah.
he's only known a life with him in it. So their grief felt bigger and felt
Yeah.
not more important, but I needed to be there. And to be able to do that fully, it does feel a bit like, hey, I have to push pause on my grief. Similarly, when my brother died many, many years ago, 15 years ago now, I felt I needed to be able to be there for my mom. She lost a child. That's the I think for most people can see that as just
Yep.
the heaviest of grief for anyone
Yep.
to have to take on. And so while I lost a brother, her grief again felt bigger and I needed to pause or sort of diminish, downplay, put space from my own grief. So how often with the caregiving that we're doing is that happening where we're taking on others' grief and then somehow what are we doing? Compartmentalizing it, pausing it, avoiding it? What are we doing with our own grief?
I know. I feel like we're just avoiding it. Like your example with your brother was exactly what I went through when my brother died because I my mom was the one that my dad was the one that found him. My mom was the one that called me. So I wasn't involved in that immediate part, but I was the first person my mom called to let me know that my brother was gone. And I will never forget the sound of her voice telling me that he was gone. Th- My immediate reaction was I need to get to her and I need to hold her and I need to be there for her because oh my god, her son just died, right? And then I found out later, my dad was the one that found him. I'm like, I have to take care of them. Like they just lost their son. So now I never even thought to grieve my own freaking loss for like 4 years. It was 4 years. He had 2 young kids too. So I'm like, I need to try to be there for these kids, put my family back together. I need to do all this that I never once sat down and thought, should I be grieving this? And we do that so much because when we are caregivers in whatever capacity that is, we put our own needs for everything aside to take care of this other person, whoever they may be.
And I want to just sort of like step out of death for a moment to say, because this is not all about death. It's about grief, is what I really want to talk about as we talk about invisible labor, because it does feel like grief is one of these things that, and again, we're speaking generalities. I don't feel like we have to keep saying that. Just everyone know we are speaking generalities, but we're speaking in the ways that we are generally conditioned in our society as men versus women, or even broader as marginalized versus not marginalized identities, right? Okay, so just put that there. There's a whole host of other things that come in play, cultural and religious and all these other things. But in general, women are conditioned to take on so much of the caretaking of other people's emotions to try and make others feel better, the people pleasing, all of this stuff. And this is happening on a daily basis. And I want to talk about grief in this, like the way that it's a part of this invisible labor we carry, even beyond the big losses. We've talked about those in that. Like that's the where I think most of us think of it, and we can see it and we can say, oh yeah, there's this big thing that that's on my shoulders because I'm caring for others. My own grief is kind of getting paused, whatever. But I think about the little daily things. So I think about my son and the ways that I care for him and I tend to him and I hold his emotions. And every time he has a little hurt, right? Like there's a kid who makes fun of him, or he loses something he loved, like a toy or whatever it is. But every time he has a little hurt, there's that little piece of that emotion that I'm taking on to try and carry for him so that he can go about his life in a way that doesn't get burdened by those things, right? And I think most parents can understand this. As a partner to a spouse, we do these things, right? We're taking on some of their pain when they come home, they've had a bad day and they unleash. And then maybe we don't have the space, the same space or equal space isn't necessarily given for us to do the same sort of thing. So we're taking on their stuff on top of what we've already had going on. So all these little things that we're experiencing every day are little forms of grief, are they not? That we're not giving space to experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. Like at the very top, when I was defining grief, it's our emotional response to a loss. And you had a great example or great, way to phrase that too. But you think about like the support maybe I want at the end of the day and I'm not getting because I'm holding all that other grief, and it could just be I don't want to use myself as an example, but like, if I, at the end of the day, like if my husband comes home from work and I've had like a really rough day and he's had a really rough day, I'm going to sit and listen to him talk about his rough day. I'm not going to tell him about mine because I want to support him. Like, God, he went through a lot today, and that rarely happens for me personally, but just that's an example, or just the fact of I just wanted somebody to talk about my day with. And now I'm in this role where I have to help support him. And this could be, anything like that. This could be with a parent, and a child. That was a great example. Your kid comes home, they've had a really rough day, and you kind of just want to have a fun evening playing games, but they're now depressed and hiding in their room. So like you're in that caregiver role and you've just lost that plan, that idea you had for how your evening was going to go because of
Or
that.
you have the play evening for them, and maybe you also had something really shitty happen to you that day. But now you're not giving your space to not only not talk about it, but to deal with it, because now you're having to take their pain away by, distracting them or helping them through it or whatever it looks like. So yeah, either way, whether their mood changes the night or you're
Right.
trying to change things to try and appease them, either way, your stuff still sitting there undealt with.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we go to bed with it. We wake up with it. We hold on to it again for yet another day, and then it compounds on itself.
What happens when that happens, when your grief begins to compound? Because I think that is what so many of us experience. And by the way, we haven't even touched on the big grief of the world around us, right? So we're talking about like big grief as in big losses, the little griefs that we all are dealing with every day. There's also this added dimension always, but it feels maybe for many people even more pointed right now with like just the difficulties of the world. And the grief that we're enduring, we're seeing on social media and on the news, and like we're taking that on too. Right. So when all of these things compound, what happens?
Well, it depends on how we cope with it, right? And coping mechanisms are everything. Not all are great. There's no I get asked all the time, like, what's the best coping mechanism? And the answer is whatever's best for you. Like, I don't know. But if we don't take time to look at our grief and feel our emotions, they just keep festering and they'll come out in other ways. Like, it's like if you take a beach ball and you are swimming in the pool and you hold it under the water, you can hold it there and you can sit on it. But man, it's going to pop up sooner or later, right? It's going to float up to the surface. And that's the same way with your grief. Like, it's going to be there and you keep pushing it down and it's going to keep pushing up and eventually it's going to smack. And if you're not lucky and you're looking down, it's going to smack you in the face. And it could come out as, an angry outburst, a depressive episode, a mental breakdown. Like, these are extreme cases. In lesser extreme circumstances, it can just come out as dissociation, right? Which then someone comes to you and they're dealing with a lot, but you've finally hit that breaking point and you're dissociating and they think, wow, she doesn't care about me. And then, they blow you off. They're like, well, you don't give a crap about me. So, and then you've got that guilt on top of everything else. So there's no easy coping mechanism. There's no right answer for everybody, but you have to take time to sit with your achy feels and feel them and face them. And it sucks. And I'm sorry, but that's the answer.
Yeah, there's no like easy button like the commercials. There's no easy button. There's no way. And that was, I'm sure you have your own stories of this too, but after my brother died, I spent 2 years really just avoiding, like running from my grief as fast as I could and doing everything I could to not have to feel it, which included a lot of drinking and a lot of like not sleeping because I couldn't even be alone with quiet thoughts, just constantly being distracted. I had to be with other people. I had to have lots of noise and doing things. I was constantly on the go. And I don't know that I was intentionally thinking I'll outrun this grief, but I think that's what was happening is like, I'll just never have to feel this and it'll be fine. Like if I never feel it, it'll be okay, which obviously doesn't work. And eventually everything kind of came crashing down around me where I started to look like, who am I? This isn't who I am. I'm hurting people. I'm not showing up the way I want to show up. And as soon as I started to notice it was kind of like the whole thing just fell apart. And it was like, okay, I have to deal with this. And it was like a solid 6 months of literally just feeling feelings, which I had a lot of privilege in being able to take that kind of time to do that because my mom let me come stay with her and all of that. I've told this story many times, but you have to feel the feelings. There's crying, there's journaling, like there's ways to get those therapy. There's ways to get the feelings out, but you have to sit and feel them. And so that's on the big thing, but on the daily grief, because I think for a lot of people, I mean, I think there's gonna be many people who can relate to the big losses because you don't get out of life without losses unless you leave life early. Like we're all going to have losses. My son's 9 and he's already had a loss. My niece was 9 when her dad died. My brother died. So most of us we don't escape life without losses, the big ones.
Right.
But none of us escapes even usually a day without some disappointments that are some micro forms of grief. So like when you think about the daily level, how does the kind of stuff you're teaching in your work as a death doula, like how might that help us translate and better understand how to deal with the daily stressors that we often let compound instead of letting them compound?
Yeah. I love rhymes and I always like for big griefs, I'm always like, you got to feel it to heal it. But for the day to day, you have to name it to tame it is my go-to. Just recognizing that what you're experiencing is grief is a fantastic first step, right? Like if you just can't, why am I so irritable today? Why am I so mad? Like, it's not my fault traffic was bad and my kid had a bad day and I got a flat tire. None of that's my fault. Well, yeah, correct. It's not your fault that happened, but the way you're responding to it that's the only thing in your control. And to understand that, okay, these things happened and I'm responding to it because I had a different plan in my mind. I had a different anticipation and I was going to go pick up my kid. We were going to get ice cream. It was going to be great, but I got a flat tire. My kid was mad. Like you had this ideal of what was the day was going to be, and now it's different. That's a mini grief. That's not a big G grief. That's a little G grief, but just recognizing I expected something and I did not get that, and I'm responding to it. Remaining as objective as you can, because I struggle with this in the moment because I get angry when I drive, and to sit
I have
back,
a bit of road rage too, I will admit.
And to sit back and to try to objectively say, well, why am I so angry right now? what this person isn't quote unquote following the rules. That's a big one with me. Like, I'm a rule stickler. People don't follow the rules. And, like, these rules exist for a reason, people. People don't follow the traffic laws. It upsets me so much. Well, why is that upsetting me? Because it's not fair that they did it. But if I did it, XYZ would happen, or I would feel bad. Or, I need to be somewhere in 10 minutes and now I'm going to be 2 minutes late because this person was driving too slow, or, whatever the reasoning was. So just understanding that it was an expectation I had that was not met, and that is a grief.
I think there's a few things that get in the way of the naming it to tame it. And I'm curious to hear what you think. One of them is, I think, just what we've talked about, that we as a culture in America, as a society and culture, we do really bad at grief. We just do really, really bad.
The worst.
Yeah.
Not the worst, but we're really bad.
Okay. That's a whole other road we won't go down, but I am kind of curious. But we do a really, really, really bad job with grief here. We
100%.
we don't want people to feel it. We are also uncomfortable with it. We give 3 days of bereavement leave if you lose a spouse. Like, it's just wild, right? Like, we expect people to be done. You get 3 days, maybe a week, and like, then you need to be over it because you're making me uncomfortable. So like, we don't do well with grief in this country as a whole. And I think because of that, one of the other ways that we fall short is we don't understand what grief is, as we talked about at the beginning of this. People only think grief is one thing, and anything else, they can't call it that, or it doesn't seem like it qualifies, quote unquote, as grief.
Right.
And so I think that's part of it. I think people can't name it because they just have never understood, been taught that counts, quote unquote, as grief, that it is grief. The other thing that I see is comparative suffering gets in the way so much. Where, again, that part we were talking about of, well, my husband's day was worse, so I need to hold space for him. And who am I to now interject or to ask for space for my seemingly trivial by comparison grief, right? And that is something that I think, especially with women, we are so conditioned to like be small, not burden others, not bother anyone, and care so deeply about others, have all this empathy, that we constantly are diminishing our own grief as like, not enough. But if you compare your grief to others' grief, there's always going to be somebody who's got it worse in the world. Yeah. So do you agree? And how do you see comparative suffering playing a role in this?
Hate comparative suffering. I don't, because we try to be helpful sometimes when we are talking to somebody who's grieving and we're not. It comes from a place of heart, but oh, well, it could be so much worse, that whole mentality, because that you just belittled their grief, right? You just made them feel like, well, my grief is not valid, and that I'm so upset must be bad then, right? Because somebody else could have it worse. And we can do, and grief comparisons like, oh, well, at least this didn't happen. Or, I'm sorry your mother died. My mother died when I was 10. I had to live my whole life without my mother. And you just lost her like last week and she was 85.
The grief Olympics.
Right? Like, you're not going to win a prize. There's no medal for the best grief. Like, that's not a thing that exists. And our emotional expression is one of those things that we're taught to like hide most of our lives too. Like, don't be upset. Don't cry. We want to get real weird about it. You take it back to when you're an infant. When an infant's crying, first thing we do is hold it and go shh, 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 right? We shush it. Crying is a bad thing. Crying's not a bad thing. And we tend to focus that on the things like the anger, the tears, the rage, the huge like outward mourning. We tend to view those more than like people who might be happy. They might be joyful. They might feel relief after a loss, and yeah, not just death loss, but any loss. But we're not looking at those because those don't make us uncomfortable. Those are fun emotions, right? So we're looking at the big sobbing episodes, the angry outbursts, and we're shaming people for those because it's making us uncomfortable. Because anger, that's no good.
Although there's also sometimes shaming in somebody who doesn't grieve the way we think they should, especially around death. But I think it's around anything. It's like we have this prescription for what your grief should look like. So if you're feeling aggrieved or have a grief over being late somewhere by 5 minutes, people will say like they expect you to get over it. That's pathetic. That's stupid. Nobody, like, whatever. Right. Yeah. So they downplay it. Your grief doesn't look like they expect. And there are people like, yeah, you might be laughing the same day that you've lost someone really important to you. And there will be people that will judge that. And like, that's not acceptable. Yeah. And that is not helpful. And so, yeah, I think part of, I love the naming it to tame it. So the first thing is we have to recognize that the being 10 minutes late and feeling frustrated and angry and upset or whatever, that is a form of grief. It's a small micro form of grief, but that's what it is. And so we need to recognize it as such instead of saying, I shouldn't feel angry over something so trivial, just to say, I'm just grieving that I didn't get there when I thought I would.
Or
That's
just
great.
acknowledging I'm angry in this moment. This is why I'm angry. You don't necessarily have to like, if the I'm running 5 minutes late thing and you're just it really, really ticked you off that day, like don't beat yourself up over it, right? It's okay to be angry at that, but to objectively step back and say, I'm angry right now because I expected to be on time and I'm 5 minutes late. And you can still feel the anger. You can still feel it.
Yeah.
You don't have to shame yourself into saying, I have no right to be angry. It's not that big a deal. Go ahead and feel angry. It's, obviously how we express that or what we do with it that's important. Don't take it out on other people. But to be able in the moment to objectively say, I am angry right now, and this is why, is so powerful.
We need a feelings wheel. I've talked about this before.
Yes.
I'm going to talk about it again. Everyone needs a feelings wheel because humans, Americans in particular, I can't say all humans, Americans in particular are really bad at naming emotions. Like people on average, I think know like 3 to 5. They know like happy, sad, angry, bored. I don't know. Like people can name a few, but they don't like, we can't get to that deeper feeling of like, okay, so am I angry or am I frustrated? Am I frustrated or am I disappointed? Like there's like layers to these feelings, and being able to put the right word to it is so helpful. And just as an exercise, especially in those small moments, to be able to start naming what is the actual feeling. So if you stop yourself to name it, get out a feelings wheel and actually name it. Where does it actually exist on this wheel? What is the right word to talk about what I'm feeling? And secondly, I just want to say, and avoid, in my opinion, those things that rank feelings. I have seen them before where they talk about high energy and low energy feelings, and like anger is a low energy feeling and happiness is a high energy feeling. And these people saying we need to be only in high energy feelings. It's really gross, toxic positivity stuff.
I hate that. Yeah.
Yeah, because anger it can be a very high energy feeling. It's a great feeling sometimes. It can be the best fuel for change, right? And sometimes we need anger. So to avoid lots of bad situations. But so anyway, find a feelings wheel, avoid the ones one that's circular, as in they're all valid, instead of one that's ranking things.
Yes.
And be able to name what it is. I think that's really important. And then don't compare your feelings to other people's, because there's always going to be something that's worse. Of course, there's so many things that could be worse than not making it on time, and not making it on time caused real feelings that you need to feel.
Yeah. I've talked with people who have like chronic illness, and I've interviewed people on my podcast who've had like horrific injuries or things like that are not exactly terminal, but they'll be in an accident and they'll constantly hear, at least you survived. And while that is true, and they are not deceased after whatever accident or whatever, diagnosis, disease, that doesn't necessarily negate all of the pain and trauma that they are now experiencing every single day, possibly, and the grief they're suffering of, maybe they are unable to walk the same. Maybe they look perfectly fine, but they can't, a lung collapse. Like I can't run anymore because I have one lung or whatever it might be. Like
maybe they can't enjoy sexual activity the way they once did, and that's a huge loss.
Yeah. Yeah. So many people, I see that a lot in the cancer community when people, quote unquote, beat cancer or go into remission, but we don't talk about like the ins and outs of every surgery they may have had. Maybe they are, they have a colostomy bag for the rest of their life, or they're impotent for the rest of their life. Like all these like little things that is a permanent change that, yes, I survived. Yes, I no longer have cancer, but I still have,
Yeah. It's that yes and of so much, right? Yes, I'm alive, and things are not the way I thought they would be, and it's really hard. When you just said that too about the things we say to people in grief, makes me think a lot about the ways we do the same thing with our children in parenting, of like telling them, well, it could have been worse, or, your friends got it worse. Like we do the same things to kids all the time when they express their frustration or their emotions around a very real loss to them. Maybe they lost a crayon, and in our mind, it's like, but you have 20 other crayons, right? And we'll say these things to them in an effort to try to make them feel better. But what we're doing is teaching them from a very early age that we then do this our whole lives, that our losses don't matter. Our feelings about our losses don't matter. We're being told and shown, get over it. And we're doing that to our kids. So parents, don't do that.
Yeah, please don't do that. I know it's real easy, and kids, you got to think about brain chemistry and things too. Their prefrontal cortex is not fully formed until they're in their 20s, okay? So give kids a little bit of a break when they have that big emotional outburst, because I was a very sensitive kid, still am. And I would get real upset about things, and I would be constantly told, like, what, this is not that big a deal. Chill out. Like,
Right.
stop crying, stop being so upset. Like, that whatever I was experiencing was, quote unquote, not that big a deal. But to me in that moment, it was. And then I felt shame because clearly I must be weird or whatever for feeling it.
Right. Or selfish or uncaring or whatever the things are that we end up taking on. And this is how affects how we deal with grief throughout our lives. So just want to throw that parenting bit in. And then I don't know, this may be lastly, we'll see. But I'm curious about community. Because again, we've talked about grief and how we are so often the miscarriage piece, but also just with death in general, how we're given a few days. And then it's all about making other people uncomfortable and all of that. And we as women are very much, we don't want to make anyone uncomfortable.
Right.
I should say as white women, because I know that there's also very big differences in that issue as well. But what role do you think community does play right now in the grieving process, like in America? Again, big G, little g, the big griefs and even these dailies. And what would you like to see it look like?
So we're really great at like labeling things now, right? And with all the different millions of platforms of social media and community that we can have virtually, like it's opened up, there's good and bad points to that, right? But it has opened up a fantastic world in that we can connect with people who might be experiencing something very similar that we never would have met otherwise. So the fact that we have these like literal communities that might be virtual, might be in person, it might be like your church, your faith group, whatever. We still have these, and that makes me so happy. I wish more people took advantage of those. But I think that is huge in just looking at somebody and being around people who get it, whether that's if you're honing it down to a very specific, like we have support groups for everything in this world. There's cancer, there's divorce, there's child loss, there's job loss. There's support groups for just about everything out there. And I always encourage people, if that doesn't work for everybody, not everybody's great with that type of support, but if you could find that, at least experience it once or twice, because to look at somebody who has experienced a very similar loss, it's not going to be the same. Their response to it's not going to be the same, but they at least understand the loss that you have suffered as well, can be so validating. And it can feel so nice because you like, let's say something like pet loss. Pet loss is a big one, right? Like pet people know it. We get it. I was devastated for quite some time after the loss of my soul cat. And I've met other people that will tell me stories. And then you meet those people like, it's just a cat. But when you talk to other pet people, like they get it. So, you can feel more open about like, oh my gosh, I have to tell you all about my loss with my cat because I know they get it. So I think that is fantastic. And I love that we can find those communities. My wish would be that we could just connect with maybe not anybody, but you could talk to your barista and be like, oh my God, my dog died yesterday and I'm just so broken up about it. And they're not going to be like, why are you telling me this?
Right.
But at least give you oh my gosh, I am so sorry. That must be terrible. Do you want to, I'm on the clock, but whatever.
I think the important piece is the piece you just said too, the way they receive it. Because I think right now there's this I think so much of it is, and for us to examine for ourselves and how we're holding space for others when they're expressing their own grief, big or little g. So even somebody coming up and just saying, because we do this in America, it's like, how are you? I'm fine is the expected answer. If someone asks you, how are you? And they say, I'm actually having a really hard day. Man, what's going on in Gaza is just really weighing on me, right? So that may not be your own big G, but it feels like it's a big grief in your life.
Yeah.
And instead, we don't feel like we're allowed to do that. And I would love if we could, and the other person could say, it's really hard, isn't it? That's all I think most of us are looking for, is just like, yeah, that is hard.
Just
But
some
instead,
validation.
we get uncomfortable and we're like, oh, who's this weirdo telling me their problems? And oh my God, they're complaining, right? If we just had more spaces to be able to just say, oh, and then to be able to give that. So like on the other side of that, all you got to do is just to give them I know it's tough, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
How far that goes. It's so simple and how far it goes, and we don't do it.
Yeah. It's also the way you say it too.
Well, that too.
Like, oh, that sucks. Bye.
Maybe not that way. A legitimate.
Right.
No.
Yeah, but to at least, because what you're doing in that moment is you're acknowledging and validating. that they are hurting.
That's what most of us are looking for in that moment, isn't it? Because otherwise what happens is we feel isolated and alone.
Yeah. Grief is so isolating because of things like that. Like you want to talk about it and you get weird responses, or people don't want to talk back, and they make you feel weird or belittled about feeling sad about that. So you don't want to talk about it. And then you're just in this little island of grief all by yourself.
Which then I'm assuming adds to that whole compounding problem, right?
Yep.
Thank you, Nikki. Before we
Yeah.
go, we're having our guest say this and answer it, which is, I know, when my invisible labor becomes visible, I can. So can you say that phrase and finish it for you or for everyone? When
Can
my
you repeat
invisible
it?
labor becomes visible,
Okay,
I can.
when my invisible labor becomes visible, I get
Or I can. Like I
let me
can.
think. Okay, when my visible labor becomes visible, I feel validated. Is that good?
Great. Is that what you feel?
That is what I feel.
Yeah. And I wonder for you specifically, is there another version, or maybe it's exactly the same version of when my grief becomes visible?
Yeah. So, yeah. Because if I were to say when my grief becomes visible, I feel vulnerable.
Ooh.
And vulnerability is one of those things I struggle with. So that's me as a person.
I love
That's
that the
just who
death
I am.
doula is like, yeah, it's vulnerable because that's real. And is that,
Yeah.
we talked
Sorry.
about, there was a cat for
The
anybody who's
cat's
watching.
joining the
Cat
podcast.
bail, cat butt, cat tail. When we talked about, so we talked about the naming it, and part of it is we don't learn how. Part of it is this comparative suffering. Is another thing that keeps us out of it then is the vulnerability of doing that?
Yeah, I think and I believe me, I've done so much like self-reflection and try to do some self-discovery on why. My husband has told me more than once. He's like, Nikki, I don't know if you're aware of this. You're kind of hard to get to know because I'm very closed off and I keep my emotions pretty well under my own, cuff, so to speak. And I've done a lot of like reflection and time, like, why am I like this? Why do I do this? And I think a lot of it is just shame that I have been shown, right? When I get too close to somebody, or when I open up, or when I share something vulnerable and I get a response that I was not hoping for, or an unideal response, like I hold that, I don't forget that. Like that stays with me. So
It's that cognitive
vulnerability
bias
is
we
hard.
have of holding negative, giving more weight to the
Yeah.
negative responses than the positive. So I
Yeah.
think so many of us can relate to that. But
Yeah.
when you allow yourself that space to do that, then so when my invisible labor becomes visible, I feel vulnerable. And then what?
And then what?
Yeah. If you actually allow yourself to
Yeah.
get past that
Yeah.
vulnerability and really share
Yeah.
what happens.
Yeah. That opens me up to healing. And I know that I don't always remember that, and I have to remind myself that. And like, kind of reference this, like it's not always, we focus on the negative before the positive, right? And I've had plenty of interactions with people where I've opened up and been vulnerable to them, and it was received very well, and I got exactly what I needed from it, and I felt so much more validated afterwards. So I have to remind myself of that though, because my little lizard brain wants to go to that. But all those other times people were like,
For sure. I mean, I think we can all relate to that. And I think that's the messy reality of being human, right? But remembering that that is what starts to create that domino or the stacking effect of if we, each time we say, I'm not willing to be vulnerable and I'm not willing to get the help I need or share in the way I need to get validated, to get healing, to get support, I'm going to keep this little grief hidden. Those all stack up. And eventually, like you said, it can result in something that feels far worse than the vulnerability, which is lashing out at someone who didn't deserve
right,
it, or, saying
right.
something we later regret, or whatever it looks like.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard to always remember, but well, thank you, Nikki. I'm going to put in the show notes where everyone can learn more about you and your podcast. So if you're going through grief, again, you help people through
Yes.
lots of forms of grief. So it's not
Yes.
just, even though you're a death doula, that is part of
Yes.
what you do, but really your work is around helping people be with their grief, whatever that grief is. And you're not someone who's going to judge the grief.
Correct.
Yeah. So I'll share
Yeah.
the links to how to work with you in the show notes, and also to your podcast, which is called Good Grief with Nikki the Death Doula. And thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Happy to be here.
Thanks for being here. And again, we hope you'll consider joining our paid membership to help support our work. The link is in the show notes. When you join, you get all of this, obviously, but also bonus content in a private podcast feed, as well as free admission into our Feminist Founders Society community calls. It's a wonderful growing community, and we'd love to have you be a part of it and to support the work we do with Feminist Founders. Until next time, keep kicking toxic capitalism to the curb, friends.